Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Walmart, America's largest private employer, is raising the wages of its lowest paid workers. By early 2016, the Walmart minimum will be $10 an hour. Nearly 500,000 Walmart employees will benefit. It's not a lot of money, but it's an improvement, and it may have a ripple effect. When a behemoth like Walmart hikes wages, other retailers often follow suit in a bid to stay competitive in terms of hiring and retaining employees. So what does this really mean? Are low-wage workers finally getting some of the benefits of an improving economy? Have worker protests, including wildcat strikes and large public demonstrations, forced Walmart to blink? Can we expect further improvements, like increased hours and more regular work schedules? We'll explore these issues with my guests, Catherine Rutschland, a senior policy analyst at Demos, and Michelle Chen, a regular contributor on employment and other economic and social issues for The Nation magazine. Welcome. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. Catherine, this is good news, but how good is it? Can you sort of put this wage increase in perspective?
I'd love to. You know, in the past, we've seen research show that when Walmart moves into a community, it actually brings down the average wage for retail workers. So we know that Walmart, both as the biggest employer and one of the largest companies in the world, has an outsized effect on markets in the area where it operates. So we hope that its decision to raise wages will be an indicator for other retailers that they can follow suit and make an investment in their workforce, raise wages, and see better profitability as a result. Now, that's not a sure thing, of course. Just a couple of weeks after Walmart's announcement, we heard from Target, who decided to shave $2 billion in costs by laying off thousands of workers. So what we really see is that retailers right now are facing a choice. It's a choice of whether they're going to invest in the workforce or extract value from the workforce.
Michelle, can you talk a little bit about the factors that led to this decision by Walmart? Obviously, the improving economy had some effect, but it wasn't the only thing at work. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Walmart was marketing this as a business decision and that they were just being a prudent corporation. But of course, they have come under enormous pressure over the years from worker protests, lawsuits, various complaints, and just a general kind of negative reputation, not only for what it does to us culturally, but for kind of just its outsized monopoly influence over retail. That's not only been to the detriment of, say, sort of mom and pop stores and local commerce, but it's also just had this incredible homogenizing effect on our economy, and not homogenizing in a good way as in raising standards, but in creating a lower uniform standard. And so I think what we should keep in mind here is that while it might be a nominal improvement in how much people are earning per hour, there are a lot more quality of life factors that people have been mobilizing around and people have been agitating around that go beyond what people are making per hour. So an extra $1 or $2 per hour isn't going to cut it when you can't get enough hours in the week to survive. So sustainability of jobs is a key thing, and for that you really need to listen to what workers are saying.
If you were going to try and weigh the influence, whether it is the improving economy, we've been creating jobs for a while now, or whether it's been the sustained protests by Walmart and other low-wage workers, is there a way of assessing which had more of an effect?
I think it's, well, I mean, the simple answer is that it's impossible. I think, people on the left would love to believe that the workers are doing it all and making real change, and I think that what you see with the Walmart strikers and the protests is that these have been pretty spontaneous, wildcat strikes that are never going to mobilize a majority or anything even close to that of the Walmart workforce. So these aren't industrial actions on the scale that we would have seen generations ago. So we need to be realistic about how much labor mobilization there actually is. On the other hand, Walmart is a very image-conscious corporation, right? And they've been getting pressure not only from workers but from consumers as well. And I think what you've seen around the Walmart movement is a really interesting convergence of both consumer and worker interests. And I think that kind of climate of increased political pressure, at least some sort of political consciousness around the effect of a single corporation and its outsized power over everything, can have an influence. On the other hand, Walmart has also had pretty good business reasons to raise wages. The fact that, they have high turnover, they suffer from a lot of these sustainability issues that, you can't squeeze enough blood out of the stone when you're not paying people enough to survive.
So, well, go ahead.
I just think it's important to note that while we've been hearing that we're in an economic recovery since 2009, it hasn't actually budged wages, and people in their households, their budgets, haven't sensed a recovery. And that's not new, right? This isn't a new trend that Walmart's responding to. This is actually characterizes the economy over the last 35 years, where we've generated higher and higher productivity, and none of that has been returned to workers. And that's the product of a very specific business model, and that's the business model that we refer to as the Walmart economy. So right now, what Walmart has decided is really that business model has stopped working for them. And what they've seen is that their sales have topped off. They've seen same-store sales declining or stagnant for the last several quarters. They've seen customers going elsewhere because they can't find what they want on the shelves. And Walmart's finally owning up to the fact that as an economic model, the Walmart economy is not the best way to run a business.
So talk a little bit about the ways in which this is a good move for Walmart.
Well, we've seen from Zeynep Ton, a researcher at MIT, a really comprehensive study of what it means to invest in your workforce and what kind of returns you can expect from that. And we know that just adding an extra $1 to your labor bill can generate up to $28 in returns. And that's because your frontline workforce are your first interaction with the brand, right? They're the people who interact with your customers. They show them where things are on the shelf. They describe the products to them. If those employees are experienced, if they're loyal, if they're dedicated, if they're not worrying about who's taking care of their kids or how they're going to get home from work at the end of the day, and they can really focus on their jobs, they actually bring in higher sales, and that winds up in the register at Walmart.
And we have seen retail models that manage to do this, sort of shifting away from the Walmart model. I mean, Costco is also a common reference point for another way of doing business in which you actually have, a partially unionized workforce that has, steadier work hours, a more stable pay structure, and actual, maybe opportunities for advancement within that workforce. So there are other ways to do it. And I mean, not to give Walmart too much credit, but if they can be pressurized to actually change their business practices a little bit, it can have a pretty big ripple effect.
Well, let's talk about that ripple effect. So you've pointed out that can go either way. I know it's early. Do either of you have a sense of whether large retailers are likely to follow Walmart's lead?
I think to the extent that customers have more money in their pockets, and this is a more long-term perspective, those Walmart employees are going to have an extra $500 up to $2,000 a year once the raise is fully in effect. We're talking about families that have a whole host of unmet needs, and they're going to go out and spend that money. So it may not happen over the next 6 months, but in time, as customers go out and generate higher revenue for businesses, I think more businesses will follow suit.
Do you agree?
I kind of take a nowhere to go but up perspective because, we have to remember here that taxpayers are subsidizing Walmart workers to the tune of, several $1 billion a year in just, public benefits that these people are living on. So after a while, you're going to hit rock bottom and things are going to have to change structurally. Just as a matter of survival for the business and as a matter of survival for the people.
So you're talking about the fact that the wages are so low that some families have to turn to food stamps, they go on Medicaid,
and Walmart,
taxpayers.
The so-called Walmart economy is very much about having the largesse of the federal government make up for what it doesn't pay in wages. So the money is going to have to come from somewhere. So if we think of the economy as something more akin to an ecosystem, then we need to recognize that all parts of this picture kind of fit together. That being said, I think a lot of the momentum is also coming from kind of a grassroots push. And you have the low-wage workers movement, the Fight for 15. These are all sort of campaigns that have managed to resonate with the public. And I think that it's a convergence of political and consumer interests and also just a general cultural turn that's recognizing that people need to have good jobs to survive and that there's more to a good job than just a wage.
So this is only, when it's fully in effect, going to be a raise to $10 an hour for the lowest paid workers. That's still not what most people consider to be a living wage. You took a look, Michelle, at what a fairer raise for Walmart would look like. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, Catherine and Demos have done work on this, but I mean, they found that it's possible to provide full-time jobs at higher wages than $10 an hour, something that might seem low to us, like some equivalent of 25 grand a year, would actually be a significant improvement for millions of workers, and it would have a genuine sort of floor-raising effect for the entire economy. And so, and the thing is, Walmart can already do this, right? I mean, the money is there. You know, it's not like Walmart's hurting or waiting for like the best time to invest. And they, the shareholder model is just them sort of trying to squeeze as much profit as possible. But by simply doing things like redirecting how they procure their own stock, for instance, and sort of, basic financial accounting things. I mean, they can actually change their business structure so that they can actually bring wages into line with something that would be more akin to a living wage. But no, I mean, to answer your question, even among the retail workers, I mean, Walmart's still very much at the bottom end of that, and it will continue to be even as it raises its minimum.
So Demos has actually done a fair amount of work on this idea that Walmart, presumably other retailers too, but specifically Walmart, can afford to pay their workers higher wages, even a living wage. So talk a little bit about what Demos has found.
Yeah, not only can Walmart pay a higher wage, but they can do it without passing any of that cost on to their really price-conscious shoppers. So they can do it without raising prices, without losing customers, and they can do it by spending the $6.5 billion that they spend right now every year, as Michelle said, buying back shares of their own stock in the market. Now, that's a huge payout to shareholders that is part of that kind of long-term trend I referenced earlier about workers generating more and more product but not seeing the returns from it. If they redirected that money toward an investment in their labor force, they could raise wages by more than $5 an hour. Now, what's really interesting about that, I think, is that when Target announced their $2 billion cost cuts in terms of their labor bill, the same announcement included a $2 billion pledge to buying back shares this year. So you really see where that trade-off's happening in a really direct way.
These are not middle-class jobs that we're talking about. The politicians and much of the media likes to focus on the middle class this, middle class that. But can you talk a little bit about what life is really like for individuals and families who are making like $8 or $10 an hour?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I keep going back to the sustainability thing, because one thing I've been writing about recently is fair scheduling and unfair scheduling practices, and these are pervasive throughout the retail sector, and they have a huge effect on a person's quality of life and also just the landscape of opportunity that these people are faced with across a lifetime. I mean, retail is often seen as a job that you just kind of do for now, right? Until you find something better. But the thing is, people are tracked into these jobs for the rest of their lives because they're in an economic situation where they can't get out. And, when you don't have enough hours to cobble together the equivalent of a full-time income, that limits your ability to, say, pursue education, to even provide decent childcare for your child. And with the unfair scheduling practices, not only do you have a lot of workers on part-time when they really need a full-time job, but you have erratic hours where people don't even know how much they'll be working the next week or if they'll have any hours virtually at all. So, I mean, I've been speaking to workers who basically could not sustain their job because they got pregnant, or they were not able to they weren't even seeing their kids during the course of the day because they were taking these crazy shifts at Walmart. And the thing is, Walmart has such a sophisticated scheduling technology program worked out, and if they wanted to take workers' needs into account, they could definitely do that. And the technology is there, the infrastructure is there. It's just that they don't have sort of the concept of the humanity of their workers that they would need to actually provide that for them.
See, I think that's a really good point. I mean, this whole idea of abusive scheduling is really something that makes me nuts. It's an affront to the dignity of the workers. I mean, I think that it's really a horrible way to treat workers. But in addition to having these schedules where people don't know from week to week what hours or what days they're going to be working, so many of these jobs are also part-time, so they're low wage and they're part-time. Why is that? In other words, what's the big benefit to these big corporations to having so many part-time workers?
You know, what companies have been doing is keeping a workforce that's increasingly flexible so that it can respond to kind of hour-by-hour demand on the showroom floor. So if it's a rainy day and traffic slows in the store, they can send people home. If it's a holiday or they get a sudden rush, they can call people in at the very last minute. That allows them to minimize their labor bill, but it's actually a significant cost on the worker. The worker has to pay what's called in economics an opportunity cost of sitting at home, waiting by their phone, not working another job, not, planning events in the future, they pay that cost, but they also pay the cost of, say, traveling to work only to get sent home with nothing to show for it.
Yeah. Right. And there's actually legislation in place now and various proposals to actually institute some kind of fair scheduling or make sure that the employer pays some penalty when they call in a worker at the last minute and then they're like, oh, no work for you. So, and there are policies that can be put in place. I think San Francisco just passed a Retail Workers' Bill of Rights, and so there are sort of institutional changes that can take place, but we can't really rely on corporations to do this on their own. And, Walmart will roll out, a nominal wage increase every once in a while, but if it's completely voluntary on their part, we can't trust corporate social responsibility.
So all of this points out the importance of having workers organized. If they don't belong to a union or if they're not organized in any way, they have no leverage in the workforce, in the workplace, and it becomes so difficult for them to fight back. So for obvious reasons, Walmart and others have been adamant in trying to prevent workers from organizing. Is there any weakening on that front? Is there any hopeful signs when it comes to the possibility of low-wage workers actually forming or joining unions?
Well, I think the announcement from Walmart that they're raising their wages is a significant win for workers. And I think that workers are going to be able to build off that win to show just how much it means to have a voice in decisions made at the workplace. And even though Walmart's not admitting that that voice is important, it's very clear that the message that workers have been sending has affected their business decisions, and they'll have an ear to the ground when it comes to that, and that'll just bring up more opportunities. Across the retail sector, what we've seen is that even within the same company, you may have a unionized location in one place and a non-unionized location in another place, and the conditions for work are just widely divergent. Some people get full-time stable scheduling and an adequate wage, and just maybe across the river, they do not. So I think when workers have the kind of infrastructure to talk to each other, to raise their voices, to get on the streets, I think that it's going to be a growing movement that retailers are going to have to take seriously. And the reason retail is going to have to take seriously is because if we want an economy where a job is an opportunity, well, the jobs are in retail right now. So those are going to have to be opportunity-oriented jobs.
It's one of the fastest growing sectors, and it might be the fastest by some measures, but I mean, these are kind of, for better or worse, are the jobs of the future. And so if you want that to be for the better, you're going to have to rethink the way these workplaces work. But I mean, going back to the need for some sort of labor infrastructure, I mean, what you see in Costco, I mean, at least what I hear is that the company itself faces pressure, even though it's only partially unionized, right? There's pressure to match the union contract across the workforce for different sections of the workforce. And I mean, maybe one of the unintended benefits of having a huge corporation control massive, the entire supply chain like Walmart does, is that you do have something of an infrastructure in the sense that everyone feels like they're connected to this behemoth corporation. So with the Walmart protests, you saw warehouse workers, protesting alongside truck drivers, sales associates. Yeah. And so if you could get across the supply chain organizing, then that would be one place to get the corporations where they're the most vulnerable, because their power so far has been based on the fact that they're able to monopolize across the supply chain.
And Walmart has illegally retaliated against workers who were organized. So part of that infrastructure is also having protections in place through law and sanctions that prevent the kind of, threats, wrongful termination, and the practices of retaliation that Walmart's shown in the past.
Which is where government and media should be playing a larger role than they're playing right now. But it would seem to me that there's no reason for retail jobs or, say, jobs in restaurants, for example, to be lousy jobs. I mean, when we talk about those industrial jobs that were so important towards building the middle class back in the 20th century, those jobs started out as lousy jobs. The pay was really poor, low pay, often dangerous working conditions, abusive practices by employers, and it was the fact that the workers organized that those jobs were turned into jobs that actually could create a middle class.
Right.
I don't see
before they shipped them overseas.
Before they shipped them overseas.
Well, and now those same workers who were in organized industries are now in those sales and service industries, looking around saying, oh, where are those protections that I'd come to count on? And I think that that's, again, going to tip the scales toward better organizing,
hopefully,
more
right,
if there's that historical memory there where, people think that another kind of job is possible. I mean, what I worry about is that there's kind of a pervasive anti-worker culture throughout society right now, where people are like, what? Like, someone flipping burgers wants to make $15 an hour? How dare they? That kind of thing.
Well, there is, but I really don't understand that. Where is that coming from? Why is there an anti-worker and such a strong anti-union aspect to the American culture right now? Do you have a sense of where that's coming from?
I think that this is the same story of that growing gap between where the productivity comes from and who gets it. We've really established a culture that believes that shareholders are the only real stakeholders in a corporation, right? That they're the only people who are really entitled to any value that's generated in the economy. And that's something that's been a decades-long project of real ideological kind of change in commitment. Right. And it's radically different than the way we thought about the economy in the 60s or the 70s, right? Yeah. But now that people think, oh, well, the shareholders deserve that money, that means that workers do not.
Right. So. The makers versus the takers of the economy, that mentality. I mean, I think you're just seeing sort of the effect of 30, 40 years of deindustrialization and neoliberalism kind of coming to a head.
But is that kind of thinking pervasive among ordinary Americans who don't have a lot of money?
Well, think about all this rhetoric around the middle class, right? Everyone in America seems to think they're middle class even when they're actually poor. I mean, there's kind of a mentality here that this is still sort of the land of opportunity where you can make it if you're an entrepreneurial individual and you're just willing to tough it out. I mean, there's a lack of a sense of collectivism that I think really feeds on itself. And as society is becoming more oriented towards consumerism, so much of our economy is based on consumption right now, that there's a real lack of appreciation for what it takes to actually produce wealth for the economy, and real wealth, as in, not just, collateralized debt obligations, but things that, are actually tangible. And a lot of that is being, done in other parts of the world under much worse conditions.
So we've run out of time, much to my chagrin. Thank you so much, Catherine Rutschland and Michelle Chen. I really appreciate it. We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Several weeks ago, a toy drone being operated at 3 o'clock in the morning by an allegedly inebriated government employee flew out of control and crashed into a tree on the White House lawn. Last summer, during Major League Baseball's All-Star game in Minneapolis, a covert radar system spotted several commercial drones flying in the vicinity of Target Field, home of the Minnesota Twins. These unregulated flying objects, which can be purchased by almost anyone and can be used for innumerable nefarious purposes, are an increasing threat to the safety and privacy of ordinary Americans, not to mention high-ranking public officials like the President of the United States. As the New York Times has reported, easily obtainable drones can be modified to carry explosives, chemicals, biological agents, guns, or cameras. It's hard to imagine that drones won't at some point be used to interfere with low-flying aircraft or to terrorize crowds at large public venues. So far, we aren't doing nearly enough to thwart such an attack. We should learn from the past. For example, we have refused as a society to adequately regulate firearms, and the result has been unending tragedy. It would be lunacy to make the same mistake with drones. We need to impose stringent and rigidly enforceable regulations as soon as we reasonably can. That's all for now. See you next time.